to get your hospital to that standard where JCI can accredit it. And the process of accreditation itself is a bit lengthy process, tedious and expensive. So, nobody invests money unless you see returns. So unless the hospital chain sees itself as a significant player in the medical tourism arena, they may not necessarily go for a JCI accreditation.
Correct, sir. So Parag, you can unmute and ask your question from the speakers.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you, Prince, for letting me ask the question, and hello to all our speakers. So, my question is not industry or stock specific. So, as a retail investor, I would like to know there are so many companies, so much of data everywhere about company, about the industry. So, how to process all of that to form a view on a company. We as human mind, we have limitations. Unlike, I believe, fund managers have all the infrastructure in place, like a good research team and everything. But as a retail investor, how would you like to throw some light on this? That how can we have a decision-making process and how to process all of that data? So I'll give a very small example. So, for example, I try to know everything about DVs in this week. The next week, or probably after 2 weeks, I'll try to read about Loris. And then after that, I'll try to read about Syngene. So by the time I reach Syngene, I would have forgotten everything about DVs and I don't have a comparable. So yeah, that's my question on how I can, as a retail investor, tackle this.
Salva, you want to go first?
No, you go ahead, Tushar bhai.
Right. So, Parag, I think that's a very valid point. And frankly, from an infrastructure perspective, most of the fund managers in that sense are not necessarily much better off. In fact, if anything, you are looking at, say, one company at a time. On an average, any fund manager, let's say in a buy side mutual fund or a PMS, would at a given point be looking at multiple sectors, multiple companies in each sector, and a lot of information overload on a daily basis. So there is definitely that challenge. I think what needs to be done is that first and foremost, your reading should be focused to get a better understanding of the industry as a whole. And when I say better understanding, I don't necessarily mean it from a technical standpoint, right? But sticking to the context of pharma, like I said in the past, multiple times, that you don't look at the entire pharma domain as one, right? Pharma and healthcare as a domain. There are 7 or 8 or 9 different segments. Each segment has different characteristics. The way to evaluate a domestic company, company focused on branded generics at home, would be very different from a way to evaluate a US generics focused company. A way to evaluate API company would be very different from that for a formulations. So first, you break it down to not at a company level, but at an industry segment level. So let's say if you gave example of Davies, Loris, and I think Syngene, right? Now, for you to get a hang on this, and you understand where these companies are operating, what is the space, what is the requirements for operating in that space, how is the CRAMS business different from others. So, for example, in CRAMS, I think there are 2 or 3 things that are very important. One is obviously, you need to have a very, very strong manufacturing process, a very strong process in place to really be cost effective and at the top of the game in terms of being able to produce something at a lower cost. You need to have a very strong team to be able to iterate and keep improving the yield or keep improving the cost structure for the specific molecules, because that is one area that will allow you to be sustainable. But more importantly, a CRAMS company is not going to sell to a B2C customer, so they don't need to have a front-end marketing team, but they need to have a very, very strong relationship in place. So you look at what kind of clients the company is dealing with, what kind of products they are working in, what are the clients they are dealing with, and whether they have a what is the length of that relationship. If you are able to, these are a lot of things are available in their annual reports, and in the con calls. And you try to make simple notes about the strengths and weaknesses of that business from whatever you read. So let's say if you anytime you're reading on DVs, you go through the annual report or you go through last 3 or 4 con calls and identify 8 or 10 points from that domain that you think are relevant for DVs. Then when you go to Loris, you try to compare Loris against those 8 or 10 points. When you go to Syngene, you try to compare a Syngene on those 8 to 10 points. Keeping in mind that no two businesses in pharma are absolutely similar. Unfortunately, this is one sector where each company is a sector in itself, in terms of the number of strategic choices available to companies. But, it does not mean that you cannot build opinion on specific segments and you cannot evaluate the common parts of the company, right? So, let's say from a CRAMS perspective, you look at 3 or 4 companies in the same space. Look at how many projects they are working on, right? Look at how many different clients they are working on. Look at whether those projects are scattered in multiple domains or whether they are building a very clear strength in a particular domain or in a particular type of chemistry, right? Tomorrow we'll have biologics CDMO evolving as a major area. So you look at whether the company has strength in fermentation and what kind of biologics capabilities they have built, what infrastructure they have built. Try to look at the kind of sweating that these companies are able to achieve over a long period. So the basically the best way to look at this would be to, rather than try to study each company in isolation, you would try to do a compare contrast at all points, at all times. That will allow you to, in general, go back and forth and build iteratively a much stronger understanding with every read across all the companies. Sajal, you want to add to that?
Yeah. So I think you have covered most of it, Tushar bhai, but maybe if I could add, so I completely understand where you're coming from. So as Tushar bhai explained, you need to take the notes because then only you can back test maybe 2 years later as well. So if you're not having your own notes, then you don't remember why you decided to go in a certain direction. So when you're recording about the company and everything, I use a very simple framework. So I'm not a fund manager, I don't manage public money, I don't have any resources, I'm a one man show really. So I use a very simple framework because it's fit for my needs. It may not be right, but it's right for me. So I do 4 basic pillars of check, and in no particular order you have to go through all those 4. And if only all those 4 match, then only you decide whether you want to take an exposure into the business, and doesn't matter which is the first one. So I start with the industry structure and I see if that there are any tailwinds, there is any sort of sustainability in this business. And what I mean by industry structure is, if you just go and Google Porter 5 forces, you'll get buyer power, supplier power, competitive intensity, threat of entry, so on and so forth. So that's what I mean by industry structure. Then management is a very critical factor in my analysis, especially when I'm buying something in India. If I'm buying in US or UK, I mean, management is professional. That's a completely different ball game. In India, I think management is the single most important factor ahead of business. So third pillar, I look at what kind of business is this. What's the I'll pick an annual report about 5-7 years back, and I'll see, read through the management commentary, what their thought process was, and then I will see, how much of that has translated into, the actual performance. So if company is saying that, we are trying to move away from commodity, traditionally a commodity API companies, saying 10 years back that, today we are 100% commodity, and 10 years out we would like to be about 20% commodity. So I'll take a note of that in 2010 they said X, and where they are today in that journey, and whether or not they have walked the talk. So that's another important thing. So management can transform the business. So you ARV, the Loris example, right? I mean, they started with a very sort of basic commoditized sort of molecule, and today look where they are into biologics, they are also into innovator synthesis, and CAR T also they have expressed some interest. So the transformation will happen. Again, Wipro example, it was, an oil company, not an IT company, but management had that vision. So management can transform the business. Don't get too hung up on where this business is today. If the management is right in terms of competence, credibility, honesty, trustworthiness, and growth hunger. So growth hunger is very, very important. And I'll give you some sort of data points, and I've been very vocal about, some of these names. So FDC started operations in 1936. And I would invite, Aditya sir to have his view as well, because some of the companies, he is publicly disclosed, that he is holding. So FDC started somewhere around 1935. uh, Indoco is 75-year-old. RPG Life Sciences 40 years. अभी इतने साल से दुकान खोले हो, किया क्या? So look at the sales of RPG, just 400, 500 crore, right? If I look at Indoco, 1500 crore in 75 years. FDC is also in that same ballpark, and they are much older than Indoco. And then if I look at something like an Eris Life Sciences, in 15 years, they have crossed 1000 crores. If I look at Laurus, in 17 years, they are where they are. And that's the reason for that song, right? Mahiya se chava chava. So I I look at everything. And last but not the least, the fourth pillar is valuation. So you give me the best possible, you give me a clean science type company, I will not pay 50 times sales for that. You give me a Tattva Chintan, I will not pay 20 times price to sales. There is a certain barrier or threshold. I will not, dilute my sort of framework to get into a business because I like this business so much that, I don't pay any heed to the valuations. No, of course. That's why I said all those four pillars, the industry structure, management, business, and valuations, they have to be aligned so that I could open my purse strings. And growth hunger is very important. And that's the reason I typically don't like companies who have been around for 7-8 decades, and they have got no serious sales or cash flow performance to show, because I mean something is missing, right? And then in those cases, if I'm buying, I want to figure out what is changing. Is there a new management that is coming in, or what sort of thought process is going on, that will likely change the trajectory of the last 7 decades, and they could grow much bigger over the next 10 years or so. Because I'm not going to make money on the historic earnings. Past gone by, bygones are bygones. Jo ho gaya so ho gaya, beet gayi, baat gayi types. I want to put my money into something which is where the perception is very bad today, and that's kind of getting reflected in the valuations. But I see there are serious triggers and there are serious earnings power unfolding that will dramatically change this business 5-10 years out. And then the valuations will also go significantly up, and of course the earnings will go, and I'll get a compounded benefit of valuations re-rating multiplied by earnings growth.
Aditya sir, same question, but on top of that, one person is asking like they have confusion over whether to average up or average down on existing holdings. So over to you, sir.
Yeah. So firstly, on the question that the previous speaker asked on, how many stocks and how to sort of build a portfolio, or how to select the companies to track. There is no one right answer. I would say Sajal Bhai many a times talks about circle of competence. If you are old enough to be an investor, have enough money to be an investor, I'm sure you are engaged in some kind of a role somewhere as a businessman or as a service professional or as a consultant. When you do that, there are few industries that you interact with. You understand the intricacies of those industries. So maybe that's a good starting point to see good companies, great companies that you interact with, and in your regular work life, and start studying about them, evaluate their stock prices. Um, on the ability to retain knowledge on what you have read in the past, uh, my version there is slightly different. I see companies as movies. सो सी आपने शोले देखी होगी ना 20 साल 25 साल पहले, बट आज आपको शोले की स्टोरी याद है कि नहीं याद है? तो बेसिकली याद है, राइट? सो वो क्यों याद है? देयर इज अ सीक्वेंस ऑफ इवेंट्स इन द मूवी दैट इज शोन, and you remember sequence A leading to sequence B to sequence C and sequence D. Similarly, if you read companies' histories as movies, this year this is what they tried, they did, this is what they tried, they could not do, this is what they tried, they succeeded, so on and so forth. So the way to do it is take the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years annual report, uh, jot down from, let's say if you're starting today, jot down from 2000 to 2022 each year key takeaways from the annual report. Once you have done that for 22 years, then again read what you have jotted down from 2000 to 2022 for 22 years. It becomes a movie then, that this is the entrepreneur or the management, this is what they try to do, then this is what, then this is what, and so on, so on, so on. Then you won't forget it, probably. I mean, at least it helps me to retain a lot of information. Obviously, there is an information overload. I am a fund manager. I look at multiple stocks, multiple sectors. It does impact, the ability to retain all of that. But I find this method very useful, just to share with you. Prince, what was the other question that you asked?
Yeah, averaging up and averaging down of
Averaging up and down. Huh? So see, averaging up or down both are very useful tools, and both can be really, really bad moves. So you have to be convinced about the stock that you have in your bag already, right? So first of all, don't buy anything you're not convinced about. Second, keep monitoring what you have bought, right? So keep monitoring the changes, the events, the results, the commentary, the competitive intensity, the macroeconomic scenario in that bucket. So keep all those evaluations going. And if you feel that, or at the end of the day, the information is telling you or the data is telling you that the company you have bought is right, and then whether the stock is going up or down, you should incrementally buy more quantity, unless obviously the stock has gone up so much that it has become absolutely impossible to justify that valuation, like Sajal Bhai was saying about two other companies in the chemical space. If the valuations are batshit crazy, then you just don't buy more. At least you should evaluate a sell, because at some point even the greatest of stories do become good sells. And same for averaging down here. I mean, if it's falling and if you're convinced that there is a temporary blip, for instance, that happens a lot in healthcare. Temporary blips come a lot in different companies at different points in time. Then you average down. But if the stock is down because the company fundamentally has not delivered, and it seems unlikely that they would deliver on their earlier promises, maybe you'll have to sell lower. So acknowledgement of mistakes can be a very powerful alpha making tool, where if you're able to acknowledge your mistakes, book your losses, move out of stocks when they aren't working out the way you thought they would. At that time, you need to say to the market that, sorry sir, I was wrong, and sell it and move on in life with whatever you have left. But don't throw good money after bad money. That's what we keep saying in our circles. So yeah, I mean, it's all about what your constant monitoring and your constant data information is telling you about the company. If the information is strong, even if the stock is down, you average more. If the information is not so strong, even if the stock is going up, you should evaluate an exit point.
right, sir. Sajal sir, yesterday you mentioned CRDMO scientist versus generic API scientist. So would you like to talk on that?
So I think I again, before we continue any further, I would like to repeat this disclaimer that none of what we are discussing today is any sort of invitation to act on either side, buy or sell, right? Or even hold, for that matter. We are just discussing our opinions, and we would probably be 100% wrong, so take that as a caveat. So yeah, I mean, coming to that, see, the way is a CDMO is a very abused word. So I see a lot of low quality management abusing this CDMO, because it has become a buzzword. My framework of CDMO is that you're not only supplying that to the innovator, the molecule itself is also patent protected. So it's not a generic molecule. So two things: it's not a generic molecule, and you are supplying that to the innovator. And I'll throw another data here, that there are low single digit companies in the listed space, I repeat, low single digit, that have actually developed or synthesized that molecule in their labs, and that molecule has progressed through the clinical phases and gone commercial, and the same supplier is also manufacturing that. Low single digit number. Majority of the innovator synthesis that is happening today, the innovator gifted the molecule to the supplier, and they had the tech transfer, and the molecule was not originally developed in the labs by Indian scientists, and today the cash flow is, and there is nothing wrong in that, but I mean, I wanted to highlight this point because it tells you about, the intrinsic moat in the scientific capability of an organization that has been through this journey. Because you not only get the molecule live, commercial, generating cash flows, you get lot of learning for the next project, and you get lot of confidence, and then it snowballs into, what looks like a 200 crore business today, becomes 2000 crores in no time. So that is another important criteria. But to directly answer your question, innovator synthesis is a unit of growth. Every scientist you hire, you are billing that scientist, and there are several models. If you go through this Syngene's presentation, they have highlighted 4 or 5 different models. One of it is profit share. If the innovator or the small biotech hasn't got the right funding, then Syngene may enter into some sort of a partnership with them, that look, we'll do it at a reduced cost, or we'll offer you a discount, or we'll partner you in this, and if the molecule is commercial, we get the royalties or whatever. So there are several models, but I'll give you one simple, where you hire the scientist. It's like IT consulting. You send your consultant, you bill that client, you pay salary to the consultant, and the difference is yours to keep. So that kind of a business is kind of cash positive on day one. All you have done is setting up the infrastructure. You can rent a lab, you need to buy the equipments, and then you are up and away running, right? And the scientist is paying um, their own salary, right? Through the billing. So it's a cash flow positive business right from the word go, as against a generic business where the scientist is working hard to do the either the generic filing or otherwise, and if they are not billing, then the company is paying for that. So the cash burn is happening at the company level. And that is the reason, if you look at Syngene with 5,000 odd scientists, their R&D expense is zero, because they are not spending their own money, right? Is the client's money. क्लाइंट का खर्चे से सारा काम हो रहा है. If molecule fails, Syngene gets the billing. If molecule is a success, Syngene gets the billing, and maybe the opportunity to participate in commercial supplies. That's the kind of model that I like, rather than this treadmill wala under file karte ja rahe ho. You are burning cash, and you get slapped from USFD, and then all that money is down the drain. So that's where the difference is. Is your scientist a revenue generator, or is your scientist a sort of revenue or cash consumer, that they are kind of eating into cash? That's one model. And the other model is that the scientist is kind of generating cash for the organization. If that answers the question.
Right, sir. Sir, we have a similar question on this. Yogesh has asked Syngene with the why don't they make a product which a Newland, a Loris, or a Suvain do make? Is it because of their manufacturing capabilities or patent filing?
No, it's the business model. Collaboration versus competition. Simple. Nothing.
Right, sir. And sir, very interesting question. Like, since Biocon has certain percentage of ownership of Syngene along with its own standalone biosimilar business, so if someone has to choose only one out of these two in pharma sector, what would be the choice, Biocon or Syngene?
Right. So before, so I've got my answer, and I will answer that with full honesty. But I know Aditya has got a slightly different view on Biocon as a business. So maybe for everyone's benefit, if I could invite you, Aditya sir, to maybe just chime in with a couple of minutes, and then then I will just present my view, how I see both businesses, and what would be my sort of preferred option.
Yes, Ajal sir. Sure, sir. Sir, so basically, on the Syngene side, me and Sajal, I think we have the same view. Uh, it's a business which has been incredibly profitable, incredibly difficult to build, and very difficult to replicate, and highly time consuming to build that kind of reputation and that kind of clientele that Syngene has been able to build. So I don't see any difference in my and Sajal's views on uh, Syngene. And I think the market views also on the same lines. So it's basically a consensus today that it's a great company. Um, and this is not a buy sell recommendation. I manage public money, so I need to repeat the disclaimer that I am SEBI registered, and I am a SEBI registered portfolio manager. Whatever I am discussing is my personal opinion. It's not the opinion of my house, and this is just for education purposes. No buy sell hold recommendations at all. So yeah, Syngene I think is a great company in consensus as well. Coming to Biocon and biosimilars, my view on biosimilars has always been, I think, from the past 4 years, I've been maintaining the same view. I've gone wrong, I've gone right, and all sorts of things have happened. But I haven't seen the data to change my view yet, which is that biosims are essentially complex generics in a way, but they are generics, and because they are generics, they will have their period of sunshine. They will have their period of sort of limited competition, high ROE or high margin, for a brief period each product, and then eventually it will get commoditized because I see too many players coming into the biosims area. I see already 30-35% price erosion in that space year over year, despite only 4, 5, 6 players in the market for a given molecule. And I see innovators fighting tooth and nail for their protecting their market share. See, the innovator business model on the biologic side is highly difficult also, because unlike small molecules, where they were able to sort of come up with many drugs in a 1 year, many launches, new novel launches in 1 year. In biologics, the innovators are not able to launch many products in 1 year. They launch 1 or 2 products in a span of 3 or 4 years. Sometimes a few years go by without any launches as well. So what happens therefore is it becomes very important to retain your patient clientele in your older products, so that when you launch a newer therapy, you can just switch your existing clientele from the older therapy to the new therapy. So the customer acquisition cost in biologics is far higher than the customer acquisition cost that was there in the small molecule business. Therefore, the cost of losing a patient is also far higher than it was in the small molecule business. And therefore, while in the small molecule business, these same companies, they yielded their patients to the generics. They did not fight tooth and nail. In most of the small molecules, they did not fight tooth and nail. In some molecules, they have. I'll give you example of Copaxone. I'll give you example of aripiprazole. I'll give you so many examples where, despite 7, 8, 10 generic companies, the innovator is still holding on to 30-40% market share, which is not normally the case, right? Now that is happening because they want to retain the clientele. They are competing with generics as innovators because they want to retain, and therefore in biosims, I see them doing that very aggressively, and therefore I don't see biosimilars being a sticky, secular, growing cash flow pool, which is what an average investor generally rewards. So that's my view. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe if I could add, so between Biocon and Syngene, again, as a disclaimer, I'm invested in both. I am not adding Biocon for almost couple of years now. By and large, I also reduced my holding in 2018, and I tweeted. So all those tweets are still there if you want to dig out, and if you can't, let me know and I can share those with you. So because the valuations were, sky high. I think in 2018, Biocon as a business was about 40 times EBITDA, and for that kind of competition wala business, I think 40 times EBITDA is way too high. I can pay 40x EBITDA for innovator CRAMS, So even if Syngene trades at 40 times EBITDA tomorrow, again no recommendation. I won't touch this stock. I will wait for maybe it to get back to 30 times, and then I'll continue my SIP. But there is no way I'm gonna dilute my holding just because the valuations are rich. Because my core belief is that a great business will never be cheap. Right. So that's one. So definitely Syngene is a much better business because it's all about collaborative model versus the competition, etc. But let me clear one myth right away. Biocon is not a pure play biologics or pure play biosimilar business. It's not. It's a because of the stake that is it Biocon as a group has in Syngene as well as on in Biocon Biologics. The base business or the standalone business is absolutely free at the current market cap. You can do the math. If you do the sum of the parts, and correct me if my understanding is wrong here, Tushar Bhai and Aditya, please. My understanding is that the inferior or the dirty business is absolutely free. अभी मुफ्त में कोई कुछ देगा तो मैं मना नहीं करूंगा. So that is the reason I'm still holding Biocon, and there is also a level of a degree of optionality in this business, whether it's Biocara or their renewed thrust on the fermentation APIs. There's a large capex that will go live next year, so there is optionality built into this business. तो फ्री वाला धंधा है. मैं तो जैसा है एज इट इज मैं उसको होल्ड करूंगा. बट हाँ, मैं SIP नहीं करूंगा. आई वुड डेफिनेटली आई ऑलवेज लुक फॉर अपॉर्चुनिटीज टू ऐड मोर Syngene. बट Biocon 2018 में it was damn crazy, and I always share if I change my sort of stance on, if I've been very vocal about either way about a business. If I change my stance, I definitely tweet, because my core philosophy is quote unquote सब साथ बढ़े.
Right, sir. So we have, yeah, Tushar.
So, yeah, if I may just add a couple of points here. I think very valid point mentioned by Aditya. In fact, what's going to happen in biosimilars eventually, and this is just from a regulatory standpoint, the people who deal with the sector more closely would be aware that the regulatory side of things in biologics and biosimilars specifically, the pathway to approvals has been evolving, right? So it was by how biosimilars would get approved, how there would be substitutability with the biologic. It's an evolving field of regulation. A lot has changed in the last 3-4 years, and one very important point to note here is that unlike in the case of small molecules, in the conventional APIs, in case of biologics, it is the biologics companies themselves who are also entering into biosimilars in a very aggressive way. Right? So you are defending your product in one space, and you're also trying to attack someone else's space. So most of the leading biologics players are also working on biosimilars for their competitors' products. So what happens is, as these companies, enter the field, they are also making regulatory pathways more clear, and they're actually opening up opportunities for the other players also. So what I mean here is that, if let's say someone like a Roche or Amgen or one of the leading biologics guys is working on a biosimilar product. Now, historically, there was a requirement to, for the biosimilar to, since biosimilars are not small molecules, you're working with whether it's a mammalian cell or a microbial cell, you're working with effectively a live, with a much more difficult category of molecules in that sense. You have to, and no two biologics, no two biosimilars will be similar, absolutely similar to each other. So the regulators' requirements to prove, similarity in efficacy and toxicity profile, or the overall regulatory requirement was very tight. Uh, as these biologics companies have entered into biosimilar space, they have actually highlighted a lot of cases where the regulatory requirements were too stringent or taxing, and which actually were not required. So they are actually easing the regulatory pathways as they also end up competing in these spaces. So this is actually possible over the next few years, that you will see substantial relaxation in clinical trial requirements for biosimilars, and they may well go down the path of how it is like ANDAs get approved today. Something very similar may happen for biosimilars over a period of time. What this will do is this will disrupt the entire space. You will have a lot of companies enter into the fray, which are not, which even today there's still restriction in individual molecules, how many people are competing. But eventually, you will find that most of the large companies are present in all the molecules over the next 3 to 5 years. So increasingly, you have to see where the value will get created. Possibly, I think CRAMS would CRAMS, and it will be a blend of CDMO, CMO activity in that sense. Will end up being a very, very profitable field over the next 3, 5 years, maybe 10 years on the biologic side, as well as what is like a branded generics business today in say India and ROW. A very similar thing could happen on the biologics side. That you have biosimilars launched in India by a lot of these Indian companies, and once they are able to create a very strong market for themselves, that business may end up earning a much better value than say being a competitor in biosimilar in US or Europe. I mean, it's far-fetched to think of that today, but over the next 5, maybe 10 years, it's a very distinct possibility that it could happen that way. Like how today domestic branded generics business gets much higher value than US generics business. The other thing is, I think, irrespective, it is applies to all industries. If there is a very, very large profit pool that is to be, that is up for grabs, you will have multiple competitors coming in. And I have extensively talked about it in the Alpha series as well. That what was the generics model earlier was the fastest fingers first type of model. The first to file para 4. You try to enter a space before everybody else enters, and you try to get as much value in a product which is declining in overall value. So when the molecule gets ranked generic, it will get completely commoditized. The market will shrink by as much as 95, 90, at times even 98, 99%. So a $10 billion drug could come down to maybe 40, $50 million in size. So the companies entering in knew that they had a limited window of opportunity, try to get the maximum out in that window. Whereas what's happening now in the generic side is companies are entering what were so perceived to be dead areas, 15, 20 players in a given molecule, and hardly any market share for an individual player. And as some of these cost leaders emerge, they continue to gain market share at the expense of some of the bigger companies who exit these products because they're tail products for them. So it starts with 15 players, it comes down to 12, then maybe 10, then maybe 8, and then maybe 4 or 5 players remain sustainably. And the company which has been a late entrant may end up getting a disproportionate market share. So the model is changed in generics, and I think at some point the model will change in biologics and on the biosimilar side. That it will no longer be that you are in US and you are there first, but it will be in a commoditized biosimilar whether you are able to extract the value, and there the focus will be a lot more on the cost side, on the process side, on the superiority of your process, and how you are able to build the business.
Right, Tushar. So, sir, we have 3, 4 questions on Piramal Pharma. So, before coming to Sandeep, I'll ask those questions. So, they're asking about the demerger thing and view on the business after it has started to be to give more disclosures in con calls and presentation. And also, one question is the pharma arm of the Piramal is like 15% is available at price to sales of 1.07. So do you think it is unvalued, and how you see the acquisition of Yapan Bio and one more yeah, Sajal sir?
Oh, is it okay? Right, right. No, so yeah, so Piramal, I've been tracking over the years, and I also covered this in my ISC Alpha Series 18 in June 2020, and I have never been happy with this unrelated diversification, right? So I never liked their financial services business, and I've seen enough of financial services in my career. I know that the loan disbursements happen. They give you all sorts of joys and bells and whistles, and then the defaults and NPS come and bite your bum later on. So I mean, financial services is not a business that I want or was ever interested in, but pharmaceuticals was. And within pharmaceuticals, again, a disclaimer that none of this again is sort of investment advice, but I see this as a sum of parts business. The best business that I like in Piramal is not their what they call as CDMO, and again I'll clarify why it's not pure play CDMO, but I'll come to that later on. The best business that I like in Piramal is their OTC business. Zero US FDA. It's an FMCG business, right? Growing twice as fast as any FMCG in India. Khel khatam. So this year they should be getting close to, if my math is right, and again please correct me guys here, because I know you track each and every company in this sector. My back of the envelope is 900 odd crore, 850 to 900 crore of sales in their OTC business, which is a branded, very high entry barrier business. I mean, in India, you are giving, unbranded generic chemical companies B2B, which is kind of having, a shade of commodity as what, 15 times, 10 times, 20 times, jo bhi matlab kuch to bhi. I think FMCG, a high quality FMCG business growing at about 25% CAGR deserves 10 times price to sales. So that's the division I like the best in Piramal. The second one is what they call as CDMO. It's a mix of CMO, fill finish, and innovator CRAMS or innovator CDMO. So it's a mix. It's not a pure play innovator CDMO, but it's a high quality business. Couple of risks that I see in this business is a lower asset turns, because their capex and opex is higher. They are operating in overseas jurisdictions, markets like Europe and US, and that's the reason the capex and opex will always be higher than from compared to a player who is operating out of India, because both capex and opex are lower in India. So that's one thing to watch out for when you start putting a multiple against that sales number. And the other thing is, of course, is it's a CMO in addition to CDMO. So the multiple that their CDMO would enjoy would be much lower than something like Syngene, right? So that's one. But I think in my head, I I mean, I can give this business, even if I give it a lower multiple, whatever that multiple is, you can decide. Um, the sum of parts is giving me a number which is very comforting. And when the market cap very recently was close to 35,000, I thought that the kachara business, which is the financial services, is absolutely free. But again, it's a risk that if something happens mid-flight, while I get decoupled from this kachara business, I mean, there may be a problem, because if I've not fully accumulated. I've just taken my initial tranche or two there, just to have some exposure, some skin in the game. And then the third business that Piramal have is the hospital generics business, which I think is a much better quality business than any of these Indian generic players operating out of the US. They've got high complexity. It's all about relationship, inhaled anesthesia, intrathecal portfolio, and all the rest of it. So I think that business doesn't deserve a pure commodity wala multiple that the other Indian generic large caps definitely deserve. So if I do a sum of parts, net, I was very comfortable with the market cap when the stock was, in the region of 1600, 1700 recently. And that's the reason I tweeted. And I also, gave my ballpark. If you search on my tweet with hashtag UV_PEL in 2018, my back of the envelope guesstimate was that, by the end of this year, December 2022 or early January, February 2023, pharma business alone could potentially command a market cap of as high as 40,000 crores. So that tweet is also there, and I explained, in summary, what the reasons were, etc. But I know the others who are there, Aditya and Tushar, they track this business much better than what I do, and they will definitely have some counter questions or some negatives that I might have missed.
Yeah, Aditya sir and Tushar sir.
Yeah, I have nothing else to add to what Sajal said. I 100% agree. Actually, Piramal Pharma business, last I counted, has 8 verticals. So OTC by far the most lucrative and attractive. But then within the other 2 verticals that they report, they have 3 verticals within each of those two. So that is generic customer, innovator customer, and backend. So pretty complex business, to be honest. Um, I have not concluded on my research on Piramal, so I would avoid, saying anything further on that. But broadly speaking, I think Sajal is right. I mean, you just have to do the SOTP on the pharma side, and I don't think you will arrive at a very different conclusion. Over to you, Tushar bhai.
Yeah, I think we probably share very similar views on the OTC space. I think one point to highlight within OTC, some part of the business is a distribution business for one of the other brands, which is probably be a lower growth business, but their own OTC franchise that they're building up, I think it will see a dramatic growth trajectory over the next 3 5 years, and that business could get very highly valued. There, I agree with Sajal bhai that that business is essentially a probably the could be the driver of optionality in some ways in how Piramal gets valued as a company on the pharma side. On CDMO, I would slightly disagree with Salbhai. I think you know while there is a mix of CMO and CDMO, and not all of it is innovator led, but the part that is innovator led business, it's a very high quality business, and I think they are growing that business. The overall margin profile of the company is probably not commensurate with what the capabilities are today. I think that over the next 3 5 years, you will see, a significant difference on the margin profile, on the positive side. And I am positive on the CDMO business. I have like Aditya, we've also not, completed our evaluation, and I will not give a recommendation either way, but I think it's an interesting business. It's a company that has got deep-rooted capabilities. They have created value in Piramal Pharma earlier, and they have been able to successfully partake that value. Successfully divest one business earlier. They have been working in this industry for 15 years. They The credentials are very good, and I think it's definitely an interesting business worth tracking and seeing how they evolve over the next few quarters and years. I am very excited to have that company list separately so that we know much more about it and we can take a more informed view.
All right, Tushar, thank you.